Okay, we are live once more. I am very excited. Today's topic is the future of artificial intelligence and the impact of COVID-19. And I'm so pleased to say I'm joined by Tom Davenport. Tom is the distinguished professor of information technology and management at Babson. You don't really need a lot of introductions. For me, I think you have inspired me all my life. It's quite interesting that there are not many people that I feel have been on a similar journey in terms of topics, because when I first started at Cambridge University and did my research there, I was doing research on knowledge management and intangibles. So some of the work that you've done with Larry was always inspirational for me. And then the work on competing on analytics, again, is quite interesting. So maybe before we start, how are you? How has lockdown been for you? How has your life changed?
I'm good, thank you, and thanks for having me. We were just talking about how we don't travel to give travel halfway around the world to give 15-minute speeches anymore, which was probably pretty. I think you said 30-minute speeches, but increasingly people are saying, "Oh, make it like a TED Talk." That was a pretty irrational way to do things anyway. I had always prayed that at some point during my working career, somebody would invent teleportation. And this is about as close as we're going to get. So it's not too bad. My wife said that I'm fairly good at dealing with reality. No point at complaining about it. It's sort of what we have, and there's certainly good things about it.
Absolutely. For me, we had a little chat before, and the world has definitely changed, and in many ways, hopefully for the better. I think whenever there's a crisis, there's also an opportunity to innovate and do things better, I think. I said that there's no need to introduce you. Anyone working in the field of analytics and technology and knowledge management has heard your name. But maybe you can give me just an update on or share with everyone listening what you're doing at the moment, what you spend your time doing. You just shared with me before we went live that you have a visiting professorship at Oxford starting at some point. So maybe you can give us an update on how you keep yourself busy at the moment.
Sure. So research-wise, it's mostly AI related still. Nobody's that interested in anything else that I've done in the past, although I did get a request actually from someone in the UK to make a kind of strong connection between knowledge management and AI. So maybe I'll do a little bit more work in that space. And I'm older than you are, so I did a lot of work on business process re-engineering at one point, and I keep hoping that will come back in some form or other. I do a little bit of work in that space on kind of process mining related issues, but it's mostly AI, getting return on AI, getting value from it, and then I was trained academically as a sociologist, so I'm always quite interested in what are the implications for humans and their jobs. And I wrote one book on that several years ago called Only Humans Need Apply, but now I'm doing with Steve Miller, a professor at Singapore Management University, a book on what we're currently calling the future of work now, how people are working alongside AI on a day-to-day basis. And we've done about 10 or so case studies, chapters so far, and some interesting lessons about not just how AI changes the job, but what other technologies go along with it and how it relates to the kind of people who do the work and how it changes the work and so on. So those are the primary things.
That's great. So yeah, if we have some time, it would be nice to dive into the future of work, because being on LinkedIn, this is people are always interested in all of this. Okay, so you recently you've written a few articles on the return on AI, and you've looked at the fact that maybe we are also entering a new winter. I think artificial intelligence has gone through a few winters before where people lost their excitement for some time. And then you also talked about a potential winter for the economy. What do you see happening at the moment in terms of both the economy and the field of AI?
Well, I mean, I think we can all see that the economy is problematic everywhere. I saw Japan's economies, Japan's GDP fell by more than it ever has before in the last quarter. So the UK, US, everybody having problems in that regard. And I think you're starting to see some signs of it coming back, but I think it's going to take a while, probably well into 2021 before the economy starts to feel at all normal again. And I think that has an implication for every kind of project within organizations. But for AI, it means reprioritizing projects. A friend of mine who works at a consulting firm says they're calling it hold, fold, or double down on the projects that they're doing. Really trying to see some productivity value. I mean, there was just a lot of experimentation with AI early on, and now I think organizations want to see, well, what's the economic return? Am I doing this with fewer people, or am I making better decisions that are measurable in terms of value to the business? And the rest of the organization, I think, is getting involved. Finance organizations are starting to say, hold on here, we could experiment with this when times were flush, but now they're not, and we have to be, I think, much more careful about where we spend our money. So I think I wrote that winter is coming piece a couple of months ago, and it, in some ways, I think the economy has turned out to be worse than anyone anticipated, at least in the U.S., because we have done such a bad job of dealing with the coronavirus.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying actually what we need to do is we need to, obviously, if the economy is not going well, we need to make sure that we're not just wasting money on any AI projects, but we really need to approach this a bit more strategically. And for those, we really need to invest properly. Is that right?
Yeah, and think carefully about what the value is, and we don't really get much economic value unless we actually deploy these projects on a production basis. And there are a lot of surveys, I wrote about some of these, that suggest most organizations had relatively few AI deployments. Deployments are hard in the sense that you have to change your business process. You might have to upgrade the skills of your people. You have to integrate with other information systems. And I think it's much more expensive to deploy than it is to do a pilot. So it's, I think, a real need for reprioritizing the ones that we're likely to deploy. We can spend some more money on the ones that probably aren't going to go much of anywhere. Let's just abandon.
Absolutely. Let me just have a quick look through who is on the stream, because it's always nice to say hello to a few people here. So we have someone from Somalia. We've got someone from Gaza, Palestine, Jordan, Texas, Satu from Finland. We've got Simon from Lagos in Nigeria. Hussein from Turkey. We've got Edwin from Colombia. Ellie from Canada, from Brazil. Is great. Keep sharing with us where you're from. We've got Caroline from Paris and in France. We've got quite a few people from Brazil. We've got Stefan from Germany and Juan from Uruguay. So I think most
of it could be a little more global, Bernard. You know.
This is, I think each of my live streams, we've covered every continent so far in every single one of them, other than Antarctica. I'm still waiting for someone to join from there. So you were talking about actually making sure you get benefits from artificial intelligence. So lots of companies are experimenting with AI, but not all of them are delivering real returns. So what do you see as the key challenges or opportunities around artificial intelligence?
Well, from a deployment perspective, I mean, the surveys are pretty consistent that integrating with your existing systems is always a challenge. It's one reason why I think more and more organizations are taking the easy way out and probably the smart way out by choosing technologies that are already integrated with their existing systems. So, you know, you see a lot of transactional systems vendors like Salesforce, Oracle, SAP to a lesser degree saying, okay, you know, here's an AI application that you can use alongside your CRM. It uses the same data. It has the same user interface. So it's quite easy for the organization to adopt. And the latest survey that I did with Deloitte said that I think 74% of people suggested that almost all of their transactional system vendors would have some AI component within a year or two. That may be overly optimistic, but so that's one issue. Skills is an issue, of course, and you have, I think, the leading organizations starting to say that we're going to upskill, reskill our people. It's hard to do, though, at an early stage like this one, and you don't really know exactly what skills are going to be necessary, and it's very job specific. So what the organizations tend to do is to say, we're going to provide more technology-oriented skills, which, you know, if you had to choose a single thing, I think is probably a good idea, but we're going to have to keep reskilling as we go along. I think redesigning processes, getting back to what I said, you know, maybe this is just my hope that business process reengineering will return in some form, but this is an opportunity, I think, to really redesign how processes flow through an organization, and so that takes an effort to re-examine how the work is done and how it might be done. And then there's always the data challenge that it can be an issue even with pilots, but now I think more and more organizations are saying, well, if we're going to, feed our AI systems with data on an ongoing basis, not just a one-shot training of a machine learning model, we have to do some fairly serious data engineering work. And more organizations, I think, are trying to pair their data scientists with data engineers so they can really make that sort of thing possible. So those are certainly some of the challenges involved.
Very good. And do you have, if we look at AI, do you have any really good examples or any of your favorite case studies where you think actually these demonstrate that companies can actually deliver a really good return on AI?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always been somewhat conservative with regard to the kind of ambition level of the project. So, these moonshots that some organizations have tried have not gone terribly well for the most part. There's some exceptions, of course, but the idea that AI is going to cure cancer or be able to recommend all stocks and bonds as well as a human financial advisor might, those have not worked out terribly well. But the things that have worked out well, even in some of the same institutions, the famous MD Anderson Cancer Center study we had one viewer from Texas that's based in Houston, and they said, we're going to use IBM Watson to cure cancer, and it didn't work out. They spent $62 million and saw no benefit. But in that same organization, they had less ambitious projects like recommending where patient's family should stay and eat while a patient was in the hospital, or identifying early on which patients were likely to have problems paying their bills, which is in the United States is always a challenge, or even boring stuff but useful stuff like IT operations AI. Even at Amazon, which is one of the few organizations I think that's had some success with their moonshots, including the Amazon Go stores, for example. Jeff Bezos says, the great bulk of what we do is quietly but meaningfully improving core operations. So I think there are a lot of success stories, but they tend to be small. I was writing a case study over the weekend about DBS Bank in Singapore for this book on the future of work now. And DBS, I think, is a very impressive organization. They've really transformed themselves. When I first started going to Singapore many years ago, people would say, oh yeah, DBS, that stands for damn bloody slow. But they've gotten very digital, and their CEO, Piyush Gupta, has done a fantastic job of transforming them. And so this case study that I was writing or editing was about fraud, compliance, anti-money laundering kind of stuff, which, isn't terribly exciting, but they are able now with they always had rules, rules are used throughout the banking industry for anti-money laundering. And that's AI, from sort of yesterday's generation, but they augmented it with some machine learning and a new platform for kind of moving the work along and bringing the data all to one place. And they're able to examine about a third more cases and hope at some point to, in real time say, sorry, we're not going to open up, we're not going to do this money transfer for you, Mr. because from the beginning that it's likely to be fraudulent. So that kind of thing, it's not hugely transformative. DBS has done a lot of different projects in the space of chatbots. For almost all of the interactions with their Indian bank are digital through a chatbot. They improve the rate at which their automated teller machines run out of cash by 55-fold. That's not hugely transformative, but if you do enough of that around an organization, it makes a huge difference, I think.
Absolutely. And do you see any industries that maybe do this better than others in terms of adopting AI? You talked about financial services. This is definitely an industry that is trying to use AI, but more in the, as you said, in the back office functions. Any other industries that you would highlight that do this well?
Well, it's the ones, Bernard, that have all the data. So telecom has always had a lot of data. They, for a number of years, have predicted churn, which is a machine learning application. They are starting to do more in terms of predicting what kinds of services they might offer you and so on. They have a ton of data about how we use their technology. You see it in travel and transportation to some degree, not so much airlines because they're quite troubled now. But, I've always said that one of the most exciting ways to make money with analytics and AI, or at least machine learning forms of AI, is with pricing. And the hotels, for example, are the pricing kings. They really know what price you will pay in order to get a room for the night, and have made that whole function of yield management has been enormously successful for them. So, and of course, you have all the digital native companies. Healthcare, I think, is on the verge of some really exciting things, but not quite there yet in terms of day-to-day clinical activity. We see all these research findings that AI can identify cancerous lesions better than humans, or identify a cardiac event that's going to happen to you. but it's all still in the research lab, not much applied yet to day-to-day clinical practice.
I agree. I've got a question here from Andrew saying, what about smart factories and Industry 4.0? Do you see this as an important use case?
Yeah, well, the sort of leading application in that space is pretty well established now. It's predictive maintenance, and it works, I think, quite well. What we really haven't done yet is kind of combine enough data in a plant, or in some cases, even in a manufactured product like a car, to sort of see the whole picture of what's happening in that unit. It really, data integration and aggregation is the primary issue there. I have a friend who teaches at MIT, and he ran something called the Auto ID Center at MIT a number of years ago, and they actually coined the term Internet of Things, and developed the first real digital product code. And I asked him, Sanjay, how long did that take for you to come up with the standard for a digital product code across industries? And he said, it's about 15 years, which was rather, I think, depressing. Now, he believed that with the cloud, we could accelerate that, and you could use the cloud to kind of change one format into another. But it's taking us a long time in all of these industries to get that kind of data integration.
I've got another question here from Nestor asking about smart cities. Do you see the application of AI progressing there?
Again, slowly, and I think it's because of data challenges more than anything else. Getting your all of your different traffic sensors to communicate in the same way, and all of your garbage trucks and so on. It's just a lot of work. There's a little bit of progress in places like Singapore, which have at least put it all together into a single dashboard. And I think you have some private sector organizations like Google in the US and Canada, and Ping An in China, who have decided that smart cities are going to be a big focus of theirs. And both of these, both Google and Ping An, are just quite amazing in terms of their AI capabilities. So I think that will certainly accelerate things, but still early days.
I agree. Looking ahead then, what do you see as the biggest challenges for businesses to run successful data science and AI projects?
Well, this whole issue of, I've been spending a lot of time lately with people on the issue of how do we classify and certify people who do work on these kinds of projects. And I wrote an article or co-authored an article several years ago about data scientists. Nobody remembers the name of the article, which was boringly titled Data Scientists, but they sometimes remember the subtitle, which was Sexiest Job of the 21st Century in Harvard Business Review. But there are so many different types of things that have to be done in those kind of data science projects. Some of them we think of, I think accurately, as data science, like figuring out, what algorithm to use to train our data, for example. But there are all these kind of deployment-oriented activities that involve organizational change in one way or another, reskilling, changing the business process, even kind of framing the problem in the first place. And that typically requires strong organizational relationships. And in many cases, that's not the forte of data scientists. They'd rather work with data and machines than humans in some cases. So I think we really need to kind of classify what are the different types of roles. I was working recently with TD Bank, and they realized that they identified, I think it was 65 different jobs in this category in seven different buckets that need to all work effectively. So ideally, you wouldn't have that in a single organization. You'd have it across the entire society. But then again, you get into this problem of how do you establish inter-organizational standards that everybody agrees with. There is a group that's trying to do that. I think I'm speaking with them next week. They're having a little conference.
Very good. So what are your top tips to ensure that AI projects deliver real business value? And what do you see as the key enablers? And have you any practical examples of companies doing this really well?
Sure. Well, I like to say, think big, but start small. That is my number one top tip, I think, to say, have some kind of overarching idea for what you want to do in your business, but every individual project can be relatively small, and together, if you do a number of these, it can have a transformative impact. So as I was saying about DBS, the other case study we're doing for this book is on their use of chatbots and intelligent agents and so on. And it takes a lot of work. Basically what they end up doing is they create all sorts of infrastructure for how customer needs can be addressed through these tools. And they almost view every call to a call center as a mistake to be examined. How did that happen? Why didn't we provide the necessary capabilities online? How can we make our system easier to use so that they don't feel the need to call the call center? Calling a call center is expensive, and it's not a terribly it's not a terribly satisfying way to spend your time. So if you can solve the problem before that happens with some digital intervention, I think everybody's going to be much happier. But it takes, I think, relentless effort over time, a lot of support, as I suggested, DBS. This is a broad organizational transformation that they're undertaking with support from the CEO down. And they also, I think in Singapore, we don't necessarily have this in the United States, but they feel like they're doing it for the nation overall. They're trying to make things more efficient and more effective for the nation. And I think that's one of the reasons why, Singapore is always doing these great things. People still have a lot of national pride there.
Oh, absolutely. Very good. I'm just saying, Cindy Howson, acknowledging your advice.
And democratize your analytics too, right, Cindy? That's I do believe that I did a webinar with Cindy's organization ThoughtSpot a little while ago, and I do believe that you can, with some of these new tools like ThoughtSpot, which is I think very intuitive, like automated machine learning that really changes what the kind of citizen data scientist can do, you can really start to change the portfolio of activities within organizations and not restrict it to a small group of data scientists. You have to have some guardrails, and I think you have to be a little careful at times, but it really empowers people who understand the business and who understand customers and don't necessarily have a PhD in nuclear physics or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just saying hello to Cindy as well. I'm doing a podcast with her later this week, so I'm looking forward to that. And early on, you talked about the book that you're working on at the moment, The Future of Work. Maybe you can give us your views on what you see the future of work will mean. How is technology going to transform the workplace and the jobs that we're doing?
Yeah. So It's quite interesting. There are a lot of sources on the future of work, but what we're trying to do is to kind of pull together a number of examples, who knows, 30 or 40 by the time we finish, and sort of inductively say, well, what's really happening across all of these organizations? Because we don't have to look to the future for thinking about how AI will affect jobs. There are a whole lot of people who are working with AI now. Just a few examples of the ones we've done so far. I mentioned the DBS fraud transaction analysis, the call center work. I just did one on using an application to enhance your sales capability, particularly pre-sales, and a kind of a growth function in an IT organization. I did one on automated translation, automated weeding, a guy who walks behind an AI-based weeder, and in the Central Valley of California, at least only that's where they are so far, and it uses deep learning to identify, is that a weed or is it a lettuce plant, and it chops down the weed if it's a weed. So medical coding, which is an incredibly complex thing that people need AI to help them on. Digital life underwriter in insurance. So some of the commonalities across this are, they all feature some form of AI. Typically, it's multiple types of AI combined, maybe rules plus machine learning. There are platforms involved that kind of move the workflow along in many cases and pull the information together. So it's not just AI, it's also some sort of single purpose platform. The work is not getting easier for humans. In many cases, it's getting harder, but more satisfying. So, AI is doing the easy stuff. What's left for the humans are the hard cases that the AI can't resolve, which is kind of interesting, I think. Certainly more intellectually stimulating, but harder work. If I fear for any group of workers, it's the entry-level workers who, if the AI machines are doing the relatively easy work, that was the work that was done by entry-level people before. So I think we've got a big problem in the future of thinking about how do we bring new people into the workforce when many of the jobs that they did are being done by machines now. So those are some of the things that we've seen. We're still only about a third of the way into this project.
And you in your book, Only Humans Need Apply, you talk about the challenge that obviously AI is coming along, challenging many jobs, but there are still lots of good jobs for humans. So
well, I saw you had what was his name, the Oxford guy, Carl.
Frey.
Yeah. I believed that, and this, I think at the time was more about faith. I think they did a pretty good job of analyzing jobs and saying what could be automated, but it seemed unlikely to me that was going to happen at the levels that they were predicting. So I wrote up this book with Julia Kirby it was really all about augmentation and how we thought augmentation was both a more likely outcome and a better outcome, not only for humans, but for companies and organizations if they handled it well. And, I still believe in that. Occasionally I, worry about what's going to happen in the future of human jobs. I did a survey with Deloitte a couple of years ago, and we asked, are you automating jobs to cut cost, and or are you automating as many jobs as possible to cut cost? And 63% of these were U.S. executives responded, yes, we are automating as many jobs as possible to cut costs. So, And I think in this post-pandemic economy or pandemic economy, we're probably going to see a fair amount of that, where companies probably will just lay off a bunch of people, but then instead of hiring them back, they'll automate many of their jobs. And I think some of that is fine. If we do it on a large scale, of course, it's going to have big problems for our economy and our society. But we need some productivity from these technologies, and we haven't had much. So obviously, some replacement of humans by smart machines is desirable. Just we don't want to do it too much.
So what would be your top career advice? Anyone listening think, okay, what does AI and data science and all these new technologies, what will they mean for my job? And therefore, how do I prepare for this in the future?
Well, I think, number one is to, ask yourself that question that you just said. What's it going to mean for my job? And how likely is it that I could be replaced by a machine? Find out something about what the state of the art is and what these machines can do. And I said in that book, Only Humans Need Apply, that I think the workforce will kind of move in two different directions. Some people will go in, they'll say, I don't really want to spend my time working with a machine day to day. I don't want to have to care about what mistakes they made or how they might be improved or how do they work overall. I just want to work as a human. And so I think there are a class of jobs that, at least right now, don't involve that and won't for the foreseeable future. Jobs involving a lot of creativity and empathy and so on. And so, target those kinds of jobs and, try to make yourself as good as you can possibly be in the ways that machines can't right now. And then the other category is to say, okay, I'm comfortable working with machines. I'm comfortable being kind of a colleague to a computer in some way or other. And so then it's learn something about how the technology works, probably improve your own technology skills, at least get good at this translation function that kind of translates what systems and AI is doing to business people, because I think there's going to be a big role for that. Learn how to manage some of the organizational changes involved in introducing new systems into the workplace, and I think you'll be fine if you take that approach. I think it's probably the latter of those two choices. I think is probably a better career choice, because I think there will be more jobs like that. I often say, people say, well, are radiologists going to lose their jobs? Are translators going to lose their jobs? You can fill in the blank. And I always want to say the only radiologists who are going to lose their jobs are the radiologists who refuse to work with AI, and so on about almost every other thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. To anyone listening, please share your comments. Let us know what you think about the session. We've had lots of really lovely comments saying it's a really good session. So thank you very much. Also, I've had hundreds of questions and comments in the stream, and I've struggled to keep up. So if anyone wants to ask a specific question that we haven't yet answered, just put it back into the comment function now so I can see them. While I try to read some of those questions, I want to take a look into the future. And so what are your predictions for AI in 2021 and maybe for a post-coronavirus world?
Well, as I suggested, I think AI as a standalone capability will be less common as time goes on. It'll be integrated into other systems. I'm not the first to say that. I think Kevin Kelly said it'll be like electricity. It'll be just sort of everywhere, and we'll just come to take it for granted. And I think that's true, and it'll make all of our systems and our processes smarter. And if you think, well, okay, I'm a salesperson. I can just call on anybody who might buy my product, or I can use a predictive lead scoring application that would rank the most likely buyers of what I have to sell. Which should I choose? I mean, it's just a no-brainer. It's not a hard thing to do, particularly when that technology is widely available from CRM vendors. I will see that in human capital, where human capital management systems are starting to help you identify the employees who will be most successful, the ones who are most likely to leave your organization, will give you some idea of what your pipeline is looking like in terms of new hires. So I think it'll be quite easy to use a lot of these technologies in the future. And all it really requires is that the organizations and the individuals sort of keep pushing and thinking about, well, could we make this decision smarter? Could we use the experiences that we've had so far as data to train our AI models going forward? I think there will be, my son is doing some work with Accenture on this, and I mostly work with Deloitte, so I try not to get too close to what he's doing, but he's trying to help Accenture think about how do we do all this with less data. Some of the systems that we use, particularly these deep learning systems, use so much data, so much computing power. They're very inefficient in terms of the data required and the electricity required to generate these models. So I think we need to make them figure out ways so they'll use less data, get back to more explainable forms of AI, as people like Gary Marcus at NYU have said for a while. I really like these rule-based systems. If we could figure out a way to update them and make them, more precise, more able to deal with complex decisions, I think that would be great. And, some people are starting to use the combination of rules and machine learning. You see that in RPA, robotic process automation, which is fundamentally rule-based for its intelligence, but more and more people are integrating it with machine learning. So I think we'll see so many different combinations of forms of AI that we won't probably worry so much about the pieces that are in it. They'll just all be integrated together.
Very good. I've got a question here from Caro, who says, how could AI change the healthcare system on a day-to-day basis?
We, I think, have a lot of potential improvements that we could make. Our healthcare system is really way too expensive. Even in the UK or other places where it costs a lot less than the US, it's still expensive. And so we could replace a lot of, I think, fundamental day-to-day healthcare decisions with AI. We're starting in the United States to realize that, just as you can have a great conversation over Zoom, you can also have a great healthcare intervention, a chat with your physician. But right now, these are not intelligent telehealth systems. They don't really take advantage, for the most part, at least in the U.S., of any intelligence. You have a company like Ping An in China has a system called Good Doctor that augments. They have 1,000 doctors on staff, but they augment it with AI for a lot of simple, straightforward questions. So that, I think, we'll see more of. Less expensive care, more precision-oriented care. Precision medicine is ultimately based on machine learning. It's a prediction about how a particular drug or treatment approach will affect your particular situation with your genome, your proteome, your biome, et cetera. It requires machine learning because, we've done that in a rudimentary way with rules in the past through what was called clinical decision support, but couldn't be very complex at all. Now we're learning so much about how the genome affects your healthcare. It's very complex. We have a lot of different potential treatment strategies. We're going to have to use AI for precision medicine. It's just, we're still in the relatively early stages of all of this, and sadly, I think it's gonna take a decade or so before we really see a huge amount of impact.
Very good. Lots of really positive comments. So just pulling one in. Dan saying, very nice session. Great to hear some level-headed comments on this subject.
I think my head is fairly level here.
There's an interesting question here from Charlie saying, how can AI contribute to address climate change? Have you got any views on that?
Well, I mean, it could tell us the implications of our actions, ultimately make a prediction about, okay, you're going to, we were talking about flying here or there for a short speech. This is going to dump so many kilograms of carbon into the atmosphere. Are you sure you really want to take this trip? It could, I think, replace a lot of face-to-face interactions with intelligent online ones, as I was suggesting about healthcare. It could, I don't know how likely this is or whether I would even think it was desirable, but it could, would be useful now when we can't travel very much anyway. It could create all sorts of simulations about travel experiences that would maybe feel like we're not just sitting in our living rooms or our offices all day. So, I mean, those would be a few. I'm certainly no expert on that topic, but it would be great to apply AI to the biggest problem that we face as a global society.
Absolutely. There was a question from Cindy Howson. I'm just trying to find this. She was asking, what about less data as well? Because the fact that the current pandemic has probably blown up lots of the data. I recently did a keynote on the importance of real-time analytics for Cloudera, for example. And in this, I talked about the fact that data now definitely has a lifespan, and lots of the data that even retailers had 6 months ago is now very much out of date. So while I'm trying to find her question, pull this in, what do you think about less data and the need?
Well, yeah, I've studied that some too. I wrote a little piece in MIT Sloan Management Review about, it's called Data Science Quarantined, with the head of an analytics program at Wake Forest. And we interviewed a number of companies, and they said, a lot of our data is no longer very predictive. Our machine learning models don't tell us much anymore. One person at a apparel manufacturer said, it's amazing what 8 weeks of zeros will do to your demand forecast. So what we found was that a couple of things. People were more likely to be using descriptive analytics than predictive now. In order to do predictive analytics or machine learning, you have to believe that the past is a good guide to the present and the future, and right now it isn't. So they were resorting to, just dashboards and so on. And then the other thing is much greater use of external information to try to identify what's going on in the world and how that might change. And I think that's, in general, a trend that we were seeing already. We have so much more external data now that we can use to understand potential demand and how reliable is our supply, because we can see what's happening to our suppliers and their suppliers and ports and all sorts of issues like that. So both probably, I don't know about the move to descriptive as opposed to predictive. I hope we get back to predictive at some point, but I think the external data focus is definitely a positive thing.
Mm. And here we have a question from Becky. How do you upskill your existing workforce to be more analytics savvy? Do leading companies create their own data science curriculum, or have you got any advice on how they can do this successfully?
Well, I think you can take that internal approach. I think that it's definitely a good idea for the organization to say, we're going to improve the skills of our own people as opposed to bringing in tons and tons of new data scientists. A, those people are relatively hard to find. B, they're expensive. C, I think you have some obligation to your existing employees. So although in another survey that I did in the US for Deloitte, I think it's something like only 10% said that they were loyal to their existing employees and didn't plan to hire a lot of new people, which was kind of disturbing. Anyway, I think you can do it internally. You can partner with educational institutions in your area. Cisco Systems a while ago partnered with a couple of different universities to create a data science curriculum, and I think by now they probably certified 400 or 500 people in data science. It's always kind of surprising to me how few companies really do that sort of thing, but I think it's a good idea. There are also, so many available MOOC-like courses. You want to study machine learning with Andrew Ng, one of the greatest AI scientists around. That's quite easy to do. It takes a lot of motivation, but it doesn't take much money or creativity. You just say Coursera.com and there it is. So.
Very good. Thank you so much, Tom. We could carry on now forever, I think.
It's fun, but
if you are you happy to look at some of the questions afterwards, because we haven't had to answer them. So if I sent you the link, you can have a little look through the questions that people might have. If anyone wants to keep in touch with you, what's the best way of doing this?
Well, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Twitter is @TDAV. My email, I won't say it, but it's all over the internet. So if you really want to get in touch with me, you connect with me on LinkedIn, and then you'll have my email.
Perfect. Very good. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Tom. As always, it has been a real pleasure chatting to you. Anyone listening, thank you. Anyone listening, if you want to re-listen to any of these sessions again, just head to my YouTube channel where you can find all of them. And this one will be available there from tomorrow as well. And we are also turning this into a podcast. So if you want to listen to this on the go somewhere, you can find this as a podcast on any of the available podcast platforms. Thank you so much, and I will see you all shortly. Bye, and bye, Tom. Thank you very much.